I'd like you to welcome our closing keynote speaker, Chris Sactchell, the Consumer Technology Officer of Nike.
Well, I made it down the stairs without falling over, so off to a good start. Just to introduce myself again, Chris Sactchell, I'm the Consumer Technology Officer at Nike. And that's kind of a weird term, right? You're used to Chief Technology Officer. So why we say that is, as a company, we put the consumer first. And so what my organization does is design, build, and operate all of our consumer-facing services, whether it's our apps like running and fuel, our E&M commerce globally, our .com, and all of our stores globally as well. And then we do brand experiences. So that brings all of the touch points for our consumer together. Now, in looking at that, it really started to occur to us that we're entering a new phase with our consumer. And it's a phase that can be defined by this, by trust equals use. And what we mean by that is how much you trust a brand and its services is how much you'll utilize it. And to us, this is really the fourth cycle of economy you have with the consumer. So I'll talk more about that in a minute as we dig in, and I'll show you how Nike thinks about this as we develop that trust relationship. But let me first start with a story. Now, this is a story about pigs. And I really mean pigs, cute little pink things, tails, ears, great. And I didn't always used to be a CTO. I've been that for my last few companies. But I grew up in the southwest of England around farming. Specifically, I used to work on a pig farm. Now, I know that makes you sound incredibly cool, but believe me, feeding hundreds and hundreds of pigs and then cleaning their stalls every weekend is not a fantastic job. And in fact, if you ever sit around and play that game that says who had the worst job growing up, I always win. Because very few people had a job that would eat you if you fell over. Also, nobody else had a job that made you smell well into Monday, which doesn't make you particularly popular as a teenager. So why a story about pigs? Well, as I was thinking of this talk, it hit me that during this job, it really came home that the solution I picked for feeding pigs was based largely on trust. So what happens is, when you get pigs, you have a long stall. The front part is kind of where they do all their crap, literally. The back part is where they do all their sleeping, and that's where the food has to go. Now here's the thing. When you get pigs, they're like this big. They're really cute. And when you come to feed them, they're like, oh my God, it's a giant human with food. Run away. Makes it really easy. You get in the stall, you go to the back, pour the food on the sleeping area, we're all good. Now, pigs grow at an alarming rate. So about 20 weeks later, you come in with the food again. And the pigs just look at you and they're like, oh, look, it's a small human being. He's got food. In fact, he might well be food. And they don't move. So you have to work out how do you get feed to the back of the pen. There are 3 techniques. The first is like the John Wayne method. So you just get your bucket, climb into the pen, and you just wade through like this, pushing pigs out of the way. You get to the back, you pour the feed. But it's a little dangerous. Now, personally, I'm kind of attached to my body below the waist, which is perfect pig chomping height. So you start to not use that method. You just can't trust it, or at least you can't trust it to get out with everything intact. So method number 2, the Indiana Jones method. So what happens is you come up to the front of the store, the pigs come forward, and basically you kind of crowdsource a piggy platform. Now you can jump on top of them, run over the top, throw the feet down, and get out. This turned out to be a really stupid idea. It's even more dangerous and less trustworthy than the first plan. I finally worked out how to do it. It took me a while because I was a teenager and distracted a lot. It's simple. What you do is you walk up, you grab a handful of food, and you throw it. And the pigs are like they're at Wimbledon. They're like, run, 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 get the food. And then you just calmly walk in behind them, pour the feed, and walk out. So why a long story about pigs? Turned out, the reason I use that solution all the time is because I could 100% trust it to work. It was consistent, it was safe, and I could always use it. And that really brought it home to me that as a consumer, you often go with what you trust, and more in the current economy. So let's talk about those cycles. If you kind of think about it, the first consumer economy we had was access equals use. So that was, you think back like 20, 22 years ago, and it was sort of like, if you could get hold of the right equipment and you could possibly get an internet connection, you might use what we now think of as a digital service. It was all about could you get access. Well, then access kind of became consumerized, but it was expensive. So if you could afford to buy the system, get online, you would use the product, you'd use the brand. But then we all found freemium and largely other sources of funding for our services. So now it became about the time we had. I remember when I was at Xbox, we had endless discussions about competing for users' time, how you'd appeal to a consumer so they would actually use your service. But then what happened is we all got really good about building glanceware, building apps that were single purpose and really quick to use. So now you could use a broad range of services. And time was no longer an issue. But what I think is an issue is the phase we're in now, the fourth cycle, which is trust. How much you use a service or brand will predominantly become consistent with how much you trust them. Trust them as a brand, trust them as a service. And there's 4 ways we thought about this at Nike to really put our brand in this position. So we found out we had to change about how we thought about the consumer, where we put them in our cycle, and how we paid attention to them. We then found we have to think about how you interact across our channels, across all our touch points. Very easy to lose trust there. Then we actually looked at how we design our products and services. How do you put trust at the core, and why do you have to do that? And then lastly, any system now, if you want to scale it globally, you're looking at a technology solution. So, how did we put trust in the middle of our engineering cycles? So I'm going to talk a little bit about each of them and show you what we do at Nike. But there's one concept that's really important to take away before we get into details, and it's this. You have to come consumer in. Now, it sounds obvious, and we've talked about consumer centricity for a long time. Put the consumer at the center, design for the consumer. But that's still different than putting the consumer and moving in from the consumer, putting them out and moving in. And the reason is it's really easy to start thinking about the consumer from your own terms. Oh, we segment like this with the market. Oh, we have these channels, these product lines, these geographies. But that's not how a consumer thinks, at least not now. Now they look at your brand across all those touch points and they expect it to be consistent. So you have to start by saying consumer in, not business out. So the first, how do you think about your consumer? Well, the first thing to understand is that every transaction is a credit or debit on trust. Now, if you're into math or probability, it looks a lot like Bayesian probability. What that means is, as you build up more and more transactions that have endeared trust and they think you're consistent, they can trust you as a brand, you kind of reach an asymptote. You sort of get to be expected. But the problem is, as soon as you do something they don't expect, that trust is eroded really quickly. So you have to focus on it. You have to be patient and build that investment over time. And then the key pivot is to not think transactionally about your consumer, even if it seems like a transactional business. You have to think lifetime value. You have to realize you're going to meet this consumer again and again in different channels, on different platforms, different services, and you need to build that relationship and think about the journey they take as they interact with your brand. Now, what you take away in a concrete sense after doing this is some things become very important. Privacy. It's not just about making sure their data's secure, because as you've seen with things like Target and in sort of post-Snowden world, the thought of consumer privacy being secure is paramount in people's minds. But it's more than that. It's respecting the consumer and what they want you to do with their data. Even if their government says it's okay, it doesn't mean it's okay with them. Then it's about reliability. How you make sure you're consistent with every transaction so it does what they expect. Then quality, because honestly, you just can't be consistent if you don't have quality built into your services. And then lastly, authenticity. As a brand, you have to be authentic. We're preoccupied with it at Nike, about being authentic and having an authentic conversation with our consumer and with ourselves. And with the internet, I mean, it is microseconds for your consumers to sniff out when you're inauthentic and then broadcast it on the largest medium. So you have to be authentic to what your brand is about. Okay, so you know how to think, but how do you interact? Well, the key is you need to, as you come consumer in, make sure that your experience and journey you're giving them does not match your org structure. And it's so easy to do. And the bigger the company, the easier this is to get wrong. Again, when we were at Xbox, we were preoccupied with this. Because if you just had a bit of intelligence and some time, you could probably draw our org structure from our interface. And we realized that wouldn't work. We had to make it absolutely seamless to the consumer. And we do the same at Nike. And what we found is the big thing that can let you down is not having knowledge of your consumer across every channel. So take our world. So let's say you've got the running app, and you've got 200-300 runs logged. You're a great runner. Then you get fuel banned, and you log 3 million fuel points. Then you go online, and you buy a ton of product from us. Then you walk into Nike Town, New York, or Nike Town, London, and they're like, "Hi, have we met?" You're like, "What do you mean have we met? I've interacted with you guys every day for 2 years. How could you not know me?" And immediately the trust is gone because you didn't know the consumer at that touch point. So you have to have a knowledge system that can get the information to the touch points. And what it really means is this. You've got to be seamless across your channels. Have to make sure it is a continual experience. Okay, so you know how to think. Then you start getting your interaction right, your consumer journey across your touch points. But then you have to think about how you design your digital products and services. So one thing you have to do is you have to make trust that core pivot. Think about how the consumer works through their relationship with you. And then you have to set and beat their expectations as they do that. So it's continual, set and beat, set and beat. A little bit like dealing with Wall Street. But with consumers, you've at least got to meet what they think. As soon as you do something they think's odd, or you let them down in some way, you miss a piece of data, something doesn't seem to register, they go to a digital event expecting to be known at that event, and they don't get treated like they'd expect, the trust dissipates. And what you're hearing is you have to be consistent. You cannot build trust without being consistent with your consumer. So although it may not sound the sexiest thing in the world, building this trust economy is really about that consistency and respecting what the consumer needs. And the way we think about this at Nike a lot is to ask this question every day. What does the consumer want of us? It's so easy in the company to start saying what you want from the consumer. To say, I'd like the consumer to do this. I would like them to purchase that. I want to know this data from them. You have to turn it around. Say, what do they want from us? What products? What services? What do they want to know about us? What do they want to tell us? You have to think that way, and you think constantly about, I need to serve you before I can sell you anything. Service first. So lastly, okay, so you're thinking about it, you're interacting across channels, you're designing your products right. How do you actually make sure you execute them? Because in our world, especially if you're skewing to a younger consumer now, their interaction with you is going to be digital. Even for a company like us. I mean, we make great footwear and apparel, and maybe you buy a pair of sneakers every 3 or 4 months. Maybe you buy some apparel from us. You buy training tops. But you might interact with us every single day digitally, whether it's logging runs, logging fuel, seeing our brand presentations on YouTube, going to an event. You interact with us constantly digitally. So it means you've got to get the technology part right. Now, the way we've looked at this is about aligning our dev principles to trust. And what we do is we take our principles which we develop our software and services, our apps, everything we do, and we look for KPIs that can approximate trust or be a proxy for it. Because trust can be an ephemeral term. So thinking about how do we rate security, how do we rate privacy, how do we rate reliability, and you build that into your dev process. And it forces you to think long term. Now, if you have product managers in your company, this is where they can get a bit upset. Because this isn't free. These are real things you have to do and build. So you don't get all the features in the world and be able to build in all these trust principles at the core. So it isn't free. But you have to do it in a proactive way. It will not happen by accident, especially if you're pushed by the sort of product managers in marketing to constantly do new things for your consumer, which we all are. You have to save the time and energy in development to be able to deliver for that trust. Because although the consumer won't tell you explicitly, I need to trust you as a brand. That's exactly how they will act. And this is how we did it. When I started at Nike, I would say our principles were like this: features, 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 maybe performance, but most likely more features. And it showed in our service. So what we did is we pivoted that. We said, what really matters to the consumer? And we came up with these. Now, it's easy when you present these to go, oh, that's just tech stuff. That's those devs. They're just, they like their security and privacy. They're not really consumer-centric. But each of these is based purely around the consumer and building that trust relationship. So think about them. You don't use something if you think they're going to leak your personal information. So security and privacy is number one. Protect the consumer. Then it's about reliability. Always do what the consumer expects with their data and never lose it. Then it's availability. Hard to trust the service if you can't reach it. Then it's maintainability. If you want to keep iterating with your consumer, you have to be able to get that product or service to them again and again in a rapid fashion. So it's maintainability. Then it's performance. Because honestly, who wants to use a sucky, slow service? It does not endear a great amount of trust. And then lastly, you get to features. Because you want to surprise and delight your consumer. But you have to do the rest first. It's like Maslow's hierarchy. If you don't get the base right, the cool things you build on top just won't matter. So that's how we look at development. We organize that way. We build it into everything we do, including how we think about our annual goals and how we think about rating people at the end of the year. We embed this everywhere. So in closing, what I'd say is this. It can seem odd. It can especially seem odd for a company like Nike that's so much about, our footwear and apparel, our athletes. How can we make you great as an athlete? But it really is. Your brand is consistent with your technology because so many of our consumers are digital first, and that's how they interact with you every day. So when they interact with you that way, what they think of your brand becomes synonymous with what they think of your technology. And so in doing that, focus on these three things, and they're kind of the Uber themes from the talk, is focus on authenticity. If you can't be authentic as a brand across every touch point, you will lose the trust of your consumer, because especially if you're like us and your consumer skews young, because they are absolutely key finders of inauthentic material. And then you have to be consistent. Always set and meet expectations. Be consistent with how you deal with the consumer across your touch points, how you go to market with them, how you give them products. And then lastly, safety. Make sure privacy works. Make sure security works. Don't only do what their government wants, which is important, but do what they want you to do as well. Never let them down. We often have a thing where we say, if you think about how you use that knowledge to serve the consumer, serve, don't stalk. Because it could get really creepy with the amount of things we all know about our consumers. So it's really, make sure you're only using what they would expect you to, and you're respecting what they told you. So that's it. Your brand equals your technology. Focus on authenticity, consistency, and safety. And you can have that trust relationship and build lifetime value. So I appreciate that I was the last thing between you and lots of free bars. So I really thank you all for the attention and for staying till the end of the day. Again, thank you very much.